Parshas Vayikra. So one time there was King Agrippus who he died around 44 of the Common Era. So one time he desired to dedicate 1,000 karbanos to the Beis HaMikdash. He wanted to send 1,000 sacrificial offerings to the Beis HaMikdash. So he sent a messenger to the Kohen Gadol, to the high priest, carrying the following note. He said, I am Agrippus the king, saying, my offerings are going to be the ones brought today. Please, today, do not bring any other offerings on the Mizbeach except for my offerings. So that same day, poor man who every day brought sacrifices to the temple, he arrived at the Beis HaMikdash, and he desired to bring two small birds as a sacrifice. So the Kohen Gadol said to the poor man, he said, I'm sorry. He said, I know that you come every day to bring your birds, these two birds as an offering, but I am unable to bring your sacrifice because King Agrippus today said he wants to send 1,000 offerings, and he said that I should only bring his offerings today. Well, when the Kohen Gadol said this, the poor man answered. He said, my master, Kohen Gadol, Adoni, Kohen Gadol, I am a very poor man. Every day I only catch 4 birds, but of these 4 birds, 2 of the birds I bring as a sacrifice to Hashem, and with the other 2 I nourish my family. Please, I beg of you, do not deny me the right to bring them as an offering to Hashem. So when the Kohen Gadol heard this, he heard the heartfelt pleas of this poor man, and his heart melted, and he brought the sacrifices of the poor man. And when that night King Agrippus, he had a dream, and in this dream a figure came to him, and the figure said, don't you know that your sacrifices were not the only ones brought today, that this poor man, that there are somebody else's sacrifices who were brought, and you should be aware that a poor man's offerings were actually brought before yours. Well, when Agrippus heard this, he woke up. He was very angry. He was startled, and he quickly summoned the Kohen Gadol, and he said to the Kohen Gadol, he said to him, is it true that you disobeyed what I asked and you brought the poor man's sacrifices before mine? So the Kohen Gadol told King Agrippus the full story, and when he told him the story of the poor man and his birds and the just overwhelmingly pure intent of this poor man to bring an offering to Hashem, the king praised the Kohen Gadol, and he told him that he had done the right thing. So this is the idea of this midrash takes us really to the core of the idea of what's behind a sacrificial offering and the power of the intent of the offering. Our portion this week that we're discussing is Parshas Vayikra, and Vayikra introduces us to the institution of sacrificial offerings, of bringing an offering in the temple as a way of service to Hashem. The book opens with the words Vayikra, that Hashem calls to Moshe and speaks to him. Me'ol moed lemor daber al bnei Yisrael. Speak to the children of Israel. If a person wants to bring an offering of a cattle to the Lord, min habakar, min hatzon, min hakvasim, min ha'izim, he shall choose his offering min habakar, min hatzon. He can choose his offering from the herds or from the flocks. However, even though that's the offering that the Torah begins with, Vayikra begins with these offerings of the cattle, the sheep, or the bulls. From the very beginning, the reader of the Torah is distrustful. We've been reading that we're not starting in Vayikra. We're distrustful of sacrifices. The Torah sends a clear message about this. Who's the first one who brings a mincha? First one to bring a mincha is Cain. And the offering of Cain is rejected. Hashem rejects the mincha, the offering of Cain. It says in Genesis chapter 4, verses 3 and 4 and 5, that Cain brought a mincha to Hashem, and Hashem didn't like it. Hashem liked the offering of Hevel, and to Cain and his offering, Hashem paid no attention. So Cain was upset about this. So Rashi tells us that Cain's offering was rejected because he brought the worst of his crops, meaning it wasn't an offering with the proper intent. And even though, yes, Cain brought from the fruit and the vegetables, but and Hevel brought from the cattle, nevertheless, the reason why it was rejected was not because one was vegetarian and one was from animals, but rather because Cain brought from the worst of his crops. And so therefore the problem is not that a plant offering is worse than an animal offering, but that the intent of Cain was not pure. For the rabbis, and this is the most important thing, the essential aspect of the sacrifice is the intent. If our intent in bringing a sacrifice is to come closer to Hashem, then the sacrifice is a powerful spiritual tool. But if the intent is to puff our ego, then the sacrifice is a sin that grossly reflects our spiritual defects. That's the whole power of the sacrificial offering, and depends upon the intent. This is seen very clearly in the rabbinic discussion of the grain offering, the mincha offering. So the Torah's description, after the Torah tells us about the voluntary animal offerings, Torah tells us about somebody who wants to bring a voluntary grain offering, a mincha. There are 5 types of voluntary minachot that are outlined in this parasha. There is just a general uncooked mincha, which is flour mixed with oil and frankincense. That's just brought to the altar, but it's not cooked first. Then there is the baked mincha, which is baked in chalot, then there's 3. There's a baked mincha, which is not baked into loaves, but into thin wafers, called rikikin. That's the 3rd type of offering. Then there's the mincha in a flat pan, which is called a machavas. It's fried, but it's not baked, but it's fried, but it's in a flat pan. And then there's the mincha that's fried in a deep pan, which is called the marcheshes. So even though the mincha is significantly less expensive than the animal offerings, the mincha alone is singled out for praise by the rabbis. Rashi supports this idea, notes that the word nefesh, the soul, appears only by the mincha, because the mincha is the carbon of the poor person. A poor person can't afford to bring a bull. A bull could cost $2,000 today. The poor person doesn't have that. The poor person can only bring a few pounds of flour. So Hashem says, even though the poor person has brought a small offering, I look at it as though the poor person has actually brought one's own soul as an offering by bringing a mincha. Midrash tells us that one time a poor woman she just brought a handful of flour, and the Kohen looked at her and said, that's not the minimum amount that's needed as a carbon. And he said, this is a pitiful amount. The Kohen said, you can't do this. So that night the Kohen had another dream, the 2nd dream in our study today, and the figure came to him in the dream and said to him, you shouldn't have rejected her offering. This offering that she brought to Hashem is very holy. It's considered as though she brought her own soul. So that's the whole concept of the mincha, is the poor person brings it from their soul. And in addition to the word nefesh, there are other clues in the mincha that tell us that the mincha is the most beloved of all the offerings. What are the other clues? The Torah tells us that there's a specific prohibition against allowing the mincha to become chametz, or leaven. It says that you're not allowed to bring kol sa'or kol tavash, you're not allowed to bring anything that's leaven or honey or sweet. You're not allowed to bring that as a fire offering to Hashem. So the rabbis, what's the reason why chametz can't be brought with the mincha? And Torah doesn't tell us why anything that leavens is not allowed to be brought as a mincha, but the rabbis hint to this. The Gemara tells us in Maseches Brachos that after Rabbi Alexandri would pray, it says in Gemara and Brachos Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, that it says the prayers of different rabbis, what they would do when they finished their prayers. And one of the first is Rabbi Alexandri, and he would say to Hashem, it's known before you that it's my desire to perform your will at all times, that I always want to do the right thing, but what prevents us from doing us? The Sa'or Sheb'isa, the yeast in the dough. That's what prevents me. And the Yetzer Hara is in every person. And the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is considered to be like the leaven that puffs the dough up. That's the Yetzer Hara. So may it be your will, said Rabbi Alexandre, that you deliver us from their hands of both the evil inclinations and the foreign kingdoms, so we can perform your commandments with a perfect heart. So the idea is in the Gemara, in the rabbinic literature, that the sa'or, the leaven, represents sin. And so therefore the mincha has to be flatbread. It can't, or without leaven in it, so that that it's a concept that the person who brings a grain offering is removing sin, is working on our evil inclination to get rid of it. So by commanding the mincha to be free of chametz, the Torah is emphasizing that the mincha offering is a pure offering, devoid of the arrogance that might unfortunately accompany the much more expensive gift of a large animal. So too, the prohibition of honey in the mincha reflects the responsibility to limit our sinful desires, which are symbolized by the craving for the sweetness of honey. The mincha is a pure offering, devoid of sinful intent or extra cravings. The biggest clue about the spiritual importance of the mincha is found in the manner in which the Torah describes the mincha. 3 times in our passage in Vayikra, chapter 2 in Vayikra, which discusses the mincha, 3 times the Torah describes the mincha as matzah. As matzah. It says, when you bring it, it shall be matzot, matzah. So this is what it says in chapter 2 of beginning of Vayikra. The mincha offering is called matzah. Now, there's very deep symbolism in the Torah's emphasis that the mincha's offering is matzah. According to the rabbis, there's a relationship, very strong relationship between a mincha offering and the matzah bread that we eat on Pesach night. The Torah defines matzah as unleavened bread, but also describes matzah as lechem oni. It says in Devarim chapter 16, verse 3, you cannot eat anything leavened with it for 7 days. It's talking about the holiday of Pesach. You shall eat unleavened bread, which is called lechem oni. So many people translate matzah as bread of affliction. And in fact, the Gemara, the Haggadah says halach ma'anya. This is the bread of our affliction. This is based upon Rashi in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 3, which says bread that calls to mind the affliction which they were subjected in Egypt. So it is the bread of affliction. However, it's interesting that the Gemara, in its discussion of the Lechem Oni on the bottom of Pesachim 115b going to 116a, offers 3 explanations of Lechem Oni, and it doesn't call it the bread of affliction. The Gemara in Pesachim 115b says, what is Lechem Oni? So Shmuel says, Lechem she'onin alav dvarim. These are something which you say about it, words. Then the Brayz says, Lechem she'onin alav dvarim harbe, many words. What are these words? Rashi tells us in Pesachim Lamed Vav that this is words of praise, of Hallel, that we say Hallel over the Lechem Oni. So that's one idea. What's Lechem Oni? Bread that we sing praise to God about. A second answer in the Braisa is it's the bread of the Oni, because the word Oni, matzah called Lechem Oni, it's spelled Ayin Nun Yud, which is the same way you spell a poor person. So that matzah is the bread of the poor person. Why is it called the bread of the poor person? Because just like a poor person, when he gets a loaf of bread, takes a small piece off and saves the rest for later, that's what we do with the matzah. We break the matzah during Yachatz at the Seder, and we put the larger piece away for later, and we have the small piece for then. We don't eat it yet, but that's like the poor person's bread. So, and this is why we break a matzah at the Seder, because it's a poor person's bread. Another reason why it's called a poor person's bread, it says the Gemara, is because is the way it's made. Just like a poor person, when they make matzah, when they bake bread, the man makes the fuel and the woman bakes the matzah so that they save time and they save fuel, and because every penny counts. That's what the Gemara says. So too, this is the matzah that we have to make it very quickly so that we could save money, that we could save time, so that the bread does not become chametz. None of those answers of the Talmud focus on the matzah being the bread of the bread of affliction. So the idea is that the matzah means the food over which we praise Hashem. The idea that matzah means food over which we praise Hashem, which is what these ideas are, because basically it's the idea of lechem she'onin alav dvarim harbe. It reflects the concept that as we gather on the night of redemption, on Seder night, we remember that all our blessings are due to Hashem. We are like a poor man expressing gratitude to our rich benefactor. So the 2 ideas of that are found in the Gemara of the poor man versus praising Hashem, they're reflected that we are poor before Hashem. We recognize our deeds. We view ourselves as poor in our spirituality, that we need to increase the way we are serving Hashem. One who views oneself as a poor person and is humble will merit to speak many words of praise before Hashem. So this idea that the mincha is the offering of the poor person and the matzah is the bread of the poor doesn't only refer to those who are actually poor in the sense of being without money. That's not what it means. It's not only a teaching that the poor and the humble are beloved by Hashem. Our tradition stresses that, yes, the poor and the humble are beloved by Hashem, but that is not the only point here. The point is that one brings as one brings an offering to Hashem, one must not feel the arrogance that sometimes accompanies religious success. The message is that as we celebrate Pesach in our beautiful Seder clothing, with our beautiful Seder plates, and our deliciously prepared Yontif food, we must also feel that we are poor in deeds and that we have tremendous room for spiritual growth. The reason we hold up the matzah high on Seder night and stare at it is to remind ourselves that we have room for improvement, that we are spiritually in need of growth, that we are poor in that sense. Our redemption story is unfinished, no matter where we are in our religious life. The night of Seder has one of its main purposes to prod us into realizing that our spiritual responsibilities before Hashem are incomplete. The broken piece of matzah teaches us that we always have to be striving to improve our spirituality and to track down the larger piece of matzah. This Pesach, we should be asking ourselves, as we lift up the matzah and as we get ready to eat the matzah, we should pause and we should ask ourselves, what new spiritual activity will we take upon ourselves in the coming year? We should meditate on this question before we eat the matzah. It's the bread of the poor. We are all poor in the sense that we are all incomplete in the service to Hashem. From one Pesach to the next, how will we improve ourselves spiritually?